All right, welcome back, everyone. We are so glad that you are with us this afternoon. If you were not with us this morning, you missed a great session, but don't worry, this is being recorded and will be available after the conference. But with no further ado, I will turn it over to our fabulous moderator, Johnny. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Elizabeth, you're just too kind. That's all I can say about that. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands this afternoon session is really about the financial responsibilities of those who are on the vestry. And this session will be an hour and a half long. We will leave the last 15 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, if you don't mind, if you write it in the chat room, and sometimes the question can be answered before the session. Otherwise, we will have our participators respond to your questions in the last 15 minutes before 3 o'clock. Excuse me, the presenters for today are Jim Elwood. He is a former vestry member of Christ Church Greenwich, and teaches courses on financial sustainability and managing crisis in churches. And he does that at Yale Divinity School. James Jordan is a CPA whose a nationwide practice provides services mainly for the Episcopal Church, Episcopal Diocese, and some of the parishes. Jim likes to be called Jim, and we'll call James James. And then we also have with us Luke Driscoll. Luke is a partner at CCS Fundraising, and he likes to be called Luke, like Luke in the Bible. So I will turn it over to the three of you, and we look forward to having a great session. James, I think you're up. Or Elizabeth. Or Jim.
That would be me.
Yeah.
And okay. We're going to spend some time talking about financial matters as it relates to the church. We're going to talk about roles and responsibilities and quite a number of different things. A little bit of an further introduction. I'm a CPA and I only work with churches. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm a member of a parish outside of Atlanta, and probably 95% of all of my clients from the Episcopal Church, national on down, are Episcopal. I'm also a certified fraud examiner. Unfortunately, there is a lot of fraud, and I get involved in that. We'll talk about that later. I'm the author of Financial Management for Episcopal Parishes, which is published by Church Publishing Group. It's in its second edition now. And I teach at various conferences and diocesan and parish retreats. I'm also on the faculty of Emory University at the Theological Seminary there, at General Theological in New York, and Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley. So a lot of what you're going to hear today is snippets of a course that I teach at each one of those. Let's look at a scripture passage. The point is this: the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. For each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. We're going to talk about transparency today. And in order to do that, we need to at least look at what the definition of transparent is. It's free from pretense or deceit or frank. It's easily detected or seen through, obvious, readily understood, and characterized by visibility or accessibility of information, especially concerning business practices. So transparency in the church is more than just money. And we're going to talk about that. But I think in order to talk about it, we need to look at first, what are the inhibitors? And then later, what are the enablers? And then what are the results of transparency? We're going to look at a number of different areas. One, lack of commitment from the top, or a lack of leadership, or a lack of internal control, or a lack of communication, indifference, money is secret, fraud. Lack at the tone of the top. And I'll invite Jim Elrod and Luke Driscoll, who are also members of this, to jump in when you feel like it. But lack at the tone of the top. Let's look at the roles in the parish that affect tone. What are we talking about tone? It's attitude. It's the pervasive daily attitude about various matters in the parish. And the roles in the parish that affect the tone are the rector, the assistants, the associates, the youth minister, the treasurer, the bookkeeper, the vestry, volunteers. It is the tone of the church. But there are roles in the diocese that affect the tone as well. The bishop, the canon to the ordinary, diocesan finance director, other canons, other members of the staff. Lack of leadership. Let's define that. It's a person in a position of power and or influence who people look to for direction, that lacks the buy-in to the vision of transparency, is unwilling to get involved, particularly in financial matters, has no conviction of the mission or need for transparency, and is resistant to change. Lack of internal control is an inhibitor. There are inadequate checks and balances to prevent the loss of assets. In my role as a certified fraud examiner, I find that to be one of the key issues that is involved when something arises. The second key issue is incomplete monitoring and accountability. And we're going to talk about who monitors and who is accountable. Inconsistent or superficial oversight of financial processes. Outright holes in the process that enable the theft of money. Lack of communication. If all the donors hear is give more money, then eventually it falls on deaf ears because that's all they hear. Eventually they don't hear it anymore. If there's little to no reporting of results regarding giving or investing, then how would anybody know if their money they gave went for a specific purpose or not? Or some clients I've seen have clandestine endowments. Let's don't tell them we have an endowment because they might not give anymore. Or uncomfortable discussing money in the church. We Episcopalians are absolutely outstanding at coming up with synonyms for money. Talent, alms, you name it. We will not say the word money in the Episcopal Church. There's a reluctance to do that. And then lack of listening to parishioners or vestry. No clear indication of where the church's financial position stands at any point in time.
James, sorry, could I just interrupt briefly? There's been a request for you to turn your camera on so people can see you when you speak. Could you do that for us?
Okay, is that better?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. If people don't know where the financial position is, and all they hear is a point in time, you know, it's coming up summer. Everybody be sure to get in your pledges before you leave. It's after summer. Everybody be sure to get in your pledges that you didn't give during the summer so that we can continue to run the church. It's stewardship time. Everybody put in your pledge card. If that's all they hear, and they haven't heard a conversation throughout the year about money, then what message are you sending? Another inhibitor is indifference. If clergy are focused on a pastoral only approach to the parish and nothing to do with temporal, then how's the temporal even going to run? There's no leadership there. Money is not our thing. I've heard that one. Let the other person do it. I'm giving you quotes that I've heard from various places that I've been. I don't want to know. I don't want to be bothered. Money is not my background or forte. Who would steal from the church anyway? And if they did, they must need it. That's the other person's problem, not mine. Jim, did you have some points here?
Thanks, James. I just wanted to add that sometimes this indifference is something that can be traced to your point about money's not my forte. It isn't just the clergy that come to this conversation a little bit on the defensive because they generally haven't been trained in these areas. A lot of times it's the parishioners that serve on the vestry. They may have gotten to the vestry through non-financial means, through helping with the soup kitchen, through being on the altar guild, and they just don't feel like they have a place at the table when it comes to talking numbers. And that is not indifference as much as a serious inhibitor.
An inhibitor nonetheless. Luke, did you have any points about this around giving?
I think the main thing is just having, clear and open communication about what's needed, to your point, how the money's being used, if we have shortfalls, what we'd like to do, sort of, is there a gap between what we need to do and what we'd like to do? So the more direct and transparent you can be with folks, I usually find the better, not just in stewardship, but also if the church or congregation is looking to do a campaign, then you're talking about even larger amounts of money. So the more you can kind of communicate about where you are and how things are being used, the better. And in some ways, if you think about it, people's giving is really a philanthropic or a charitable investment, just like their normal investments. They want to know what's happening with it, how's it being used. And so I think there's a lot of parallels there.
Super, thank you. I've also heard this one. Money is secret. And here are quotes. Nobody needs to know what our giving levels are. I'm the only one who has access to the discretionary fund, and that's it. As rector, I don't want to know who gives or how much. I'm focused on the pastoral side. Or only the endowment committee knows what we have or what we do with it. By the way, who's on the endowment committee anyway? Fraud. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners for the last 32 years has surveyed people like me and others that are fraud examiners around the world. And over the last 32 years, consistently, 1 in 6 nonprofits experience internal fraud annually. Now, that's not just a few copies were made on the copier or the pencils left the pencil box. These are deliberately contrived, conspired, and concealed, stolen assets of the church. In fact, they find that 5% of income is lost by every organization annually due to fraud. My experience is more like 1 out of 3 churches that I audit. It's gotten a little better lately, but now it's actually come back in the pandemic. The cyber fraud is amazing. I had one parish where a fraudster was able to convince the bookkeeper to change the routing and transit and account number of their checking account to a different location using an email that looked, walked, and quacked like it came from the rector. And that money ended up going to a debit card and is gone. That has happened in the last 120 days 6 times that I've gotten involved in. So fraud occurs and we really have to guard ourselves. So my question then is, if things like that happen, what's the impact in the pew? Who would steal money from the church? Well, frankly, the answer is anyone with access. Let me show you how long it takes to steal money from a church. This is a video from Ocala, Florida, posted on the internet by the sheriff's department down there. In the sacristy, or a little side room off from the sanctuary, once the collection is made, it's immediately carried out of the sanctuary and put into this sacristy or other side room. This whole video is 2 minutes long, but I'm going to stop with commentary. Now, what you need to know is this is during a service. So faintly in the background, you're going to hear the priest on the other side of the wall as the epiclesis is coming. The epiclesis is when the priest calls down the Holy Spirit into the bread and wine. And this happens to be a Catholic church. And you can hear the bells ring when it's the host is, the Holy Spirit's called into the host. And again, when it's called into the wine. Watch what this person's doing. It's checking to make sure nobody's watching. Oh, let's don't bother with the envelopes. It's too hard to deal with those. There's the first bell. Holy Spirit's in the house. Let's check to make sure nobody's coming. There are the second bells. Still not interested in the envelopes. Nobody's coming. Oh, let's cover it up. And what the heck? Maybe there's money inside there too. 2 minutes.
We all know the story of the widow's 2 mites. She gave all she had to the temple, and Jesus said she had given more than all the rest. Let's look at this parable in a modern day setting. There is a lady sitting with her 2 children in the pew to your left. You have known her for several years as she regularly attends church. It is sad her husband left her a couple of years ago, but she found a job and seems to have done okay. As the plate is passed, she reaches into her purse and puts her offering in the plate. What you do not know is that she reached in and gathered everything she had in her purse. But there's something further you do not know. She lost her job 2 weeks ago and still has not found another one and is embarrassed to tell anyone. She will have to choose between food or rent or electricity in another couple of weeks. You do not want to stand before the church next Sunday and announce that fraud had been discovered. There's money missing, but the church really needs the money. Would you mind giving it again? We must protect the widow and her 2 mites. We must protect the woman in the pew's trust in the church and her heartfelt gift. Stewardship is not about the giving campaign alone. It is about the getting and the using too. Complete stewardship is about protecting the donor and the church.
So I know that Luke's going to talk to us about stewardship specifically later on. That was not intended to talk about stewardship, but about the giving and the getting too. So let's look at enablers. Any good consultant has a 4-box model, and any good consultant can borrow a good 4-box model that's been around for about 40 years. So, but we're going to apply this to the local parish. And we're going to talk about, people, process, technology, and organization. And I've got 4 introductory 90-second or less videos to talk about each one of these as we go through here.
There are 4 parts of the church that must be in balance for there to be transparency regarding financial matters. They are people, process, technology, and organization. We will now examine the first, people. The pastor is the CEO of the church. They must pay attention to both the pastoral as well as the temporal parts of the organization. There can be only one CEO or leader of the church, and the only real leader at the top of a church is a pastor. The pastor sets the tone for the entire organization. They are the spiritual leader, but must also be the temporal leader. All of the business functions of the church are performed throughout the week by staff who report to the pastor or by volunteers who take direction from the pastor. In addition, the pastor is responsible for the implementation and execution of internal control as established by the governing body. The tone set by the pastor determines the attention paid by staff and volunteers to the proper execution of the processes that enable internal control. If the pastor is not concerned with money, its protection, and use for purpose, then why should anyone else? Staff and volunteers largely do what is expected of them, but without the guidance and support of the boss, why would they? Do we really expect them to know what to do on their own, make up their own processes? The CEO pastor does not abdicate leadership to others, yet the CEO pastor maintains the responsibility for the smooth running of the church on a daily basis. The members of the church do notice when there is clear leadership and gain confidence that money donated will go to its intended purpose. Often, this confidence will lead to greater giving through more consistent pledge renewals, increased contributions, or participation in other church activities or additional fundraising. People join successful organizations and leave them because of management. The CEO pastor is responsible for both.
Okay, let's talk about people. Again, we come back to the tone of the conversation or the attitude from both the diocesan level and at the local parish level.
There are 4 parts of the church that must be in balance for there to be transparency regarding financial matters. They are people, process, technology, and organization. We will now examine the second, process. The processes of the church can determine how well the church operates on a daily basis. The process of collecting, counting, depositing, and posting donations is one that requires attention to what seems like innocuous detail. Yet the attention to the detail or lack thereof will determine whether the money can be traced from the donor to the bank and into the books. The process of authorizing and approving expenditures for invoices or receipts for reimbursement is also one that requires well-designed checks and balances. It is the governing body's fiduciary responsibility to design the processes such that a system of checks and balances virtually ensure the proper handling of money and greatly minimizes the opportunity for theft. Who actually performs the various roles in the process is vitally important. It is critical that the separation of duties is such that internal control is established and not compromised. I created a simple model called the 3-legged stool of internal control. The first leg of the stool says, if you handle the money, you cannot post the books. This largely ensures that there is little chance for skimming the money away from the church before it can be posted in the books. The second leg of the stool says, if you post the books, you cannot handle the money. This largely prevents checks being written and falsified later in the books, which is called larceny. The third leg of the stool is a person who reconciles and does neither of the 2 legs functions. In this manner, handling money, posting the books, and reconciling are performed independently by 3 different people.
Okay, let's talk about process. Clear internal control has to be in place. It has to be inspected and tested. There has to be a separation of duties. There has to be an audit trail that you can follow the money from the cash in the plate to the deposit to the posting in the books. There must be authorization for disbursement and following that from its authorization to the checks being written to their coming back into the bank account and being posted in the books. And there is a requirement for oversight and accountability. And then finally, independent reconciliation of all accounts, including clergy discretionary, credit cards, and brokerage accounts. The 3-legged stool says, if someone handles the money, they cannot post the books. What that means is you can count it, you can deposit it, but you cannot post the contributions in the contribution module of the software. In the world of fraud examination and law, it's called skimming. If money disappears before it ever gets into the books, it's called skimming. The next leg of the stool deals with larceny. And it says the money is in the books, but now they figured out how to get it out to their own benefit. So if you've got a bookkeeper that's posting the books, they cannot handle the money. And if it's the parish administrator who's posting the books, you cannot give them the signed checks for them to mail on Monday morning. And then we want somebody that reconciles that does neither. They don't handle the money and they're not in the books. Now, I tell you all of this, and I don't have enough time to compact 15-week class into an hour and 15 minutes. But there are anecdotes that go with this, and every one of the things that I say in here are because something has already happened. In 1 year, I found 11 churches in one diocese that had fraud to the tune of $250,000 across the 11 of them. And they're all in violation of this.
There are 4 parts of the church that must be in balance for there to be transparency regarding financial matters. They are people, process, technology, and organization. We will examine the third, technology. Properly recording the transactions of the church, whether deposits, expenditures, purchases, or loans, is vital. The governing body must know the financial status of the church in a timely and accurate manner to be able to predict the cash flow of the church. This requires the use of proper church software and a person who is knowledgeable in fund accounting. Someone who is knowledgeable in commercial accounting is very likely not equipped to handle the differences without additional training. Just as doctors or lawyers specialize, so do CPAs and accountants. One mistake a church makes is trying to find a bookkeeper that knows their particular software. It is more important to find a bookkeeper that knows fund accounting and churches. That person can be taught the particular software easier than the other way around. It is imperative that one use a robust, well-established, industry-leading software, such as ACS or ParishSoft. Using software such as QuickBooks or from smaller software companies is not appropriate and should be avoided. I have white papers on the internet explaining why. You can find them at ACS Technology's website or ParishSoft's website. They also list the criteria for choosing the right software for your church.
Megan this morning talked about cannons, and I happen to be a cannon hawk because many times it helps me get out of trouble when I get myself into trouble. I had a bishop when I was teaching at General Theological in New York. I had a bishop in that northeastern area write a letter to all the parishes and say, I give up. We're not going to have an audit but once every 7 years. So y'all just don't worry about it. Go ahead and get an audit once every 7 years. It took me about 2 hours to get to Chuck Robinson, who happened to be teaching that day with me, to get to Catherine Jeffries and go, that is not what the canons say. And it took less than 24 hours for the letter to be rescinded. And we'll see why later on. Title I, Canon 7E says, books of account shall be so kept as to provide the basis for satisfactory accounting. Now, there are a couple of things that we need to look at here. There are no accounts excluded. It includes discretionary accounts. It includes loans to the rector to make a move. It includes your PPP loan. It includes your endowments. It includes all accounts of the church recorded and reconciled in the books. As the vestry, you are responsible for that, and we're going to talk about a little bit more. Satisfactory accounting. Churches are not for profits. Fund accounting principles and methods, not commercial accounting, are satisfactory accounting. Fund accounting software will facilitate that. But using QuickBooks, using Excel spreadsheets, or using other methods that are not fund accounting will not properly record and even get close to revealing what you need to know in a vestry meeting. I can go into a diatribe on that, but we can do that later. And it needs to be conducted by somebody that understands fund accounting, not just someone who worked at a church somewhere else and maybe keeps the books at their office or just have time. You got to know what you're doing, because we have donors in fund accounting. We don't have owners of stock. We can't set aside, and shouldn't and won't set aside, a portion of the church for somebody to own. That's commercial accounting. But donors give for a specific purpose. Commercial accounting has absolutely no idea and no method or mechanism to account for donor donations. None. So then you start jury rigging the commercial system, and you just don't get there. You must use fund accounting. You must use fund accounting software, and it must be executed by somebody that knows what they're doing. And I will talk about the CPA profession. I'd say 95% of the CPAs out there have no idea. They'd have to sit down and start going back through their textbooks to learn what fund accounting was. So pay attention to how your accounting gets done. We've got to have complete financial assets in the system, all debt, everything. Here is an interesting anecdote. I was called by the canon to the ordinary one Saturday night about 8:30 and told that I needed to be in a parish the next morning as soon as the service was over. I walked in about 11:45 and in the Undercroft, and there on the bulletin board were the financial statements. And the financial statements didn't balance. In fact, the amount of money that had been stolen was obvious on the face of the financial statements. $11,900. I knew right away how much had been stolen. Very simple. But here's what went on in the vestry meeting 3 months prior when this fraud started. Hey, John Doe, you got the financial report for us now? Yeah, I got the financial statements that are passed out. You got them at your place. You can see we got some money in the bank and everything's kind of going status quo. You know, we're getting a little behind, but you know, it's late May, early June, and you know, we'll fall back a little bit on our pledges and whatnot, but we'll catch up. That's about it. Well, somebody said, well, I move we accept these financial statements. Somebody else said, well, me too. I second that. The senior warden said, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that's good. Thank you, John. Move on. Same thing happened the second month. Same thing happened the third month. The vestry authorized and approved financial statements they didn't even know how to read because it was in plain sight how much they'd been stolen. So, you've got to make sure endowments are a part of it, and you've got to make sure net assets. So let's talk about how to read a little bit. In the old days, which was prior to about 1.5 years ago, financial statements and what people call a balance sheet of a church are broken into 3 areas: assets, liabilities, and net assets. Well, what about owner's equity? Well, that doesn't exist. This is not for profit accounting. There are no common stock. There is no retained earnings. There is no paid-in capital. It doesn't exist. So the net assets are divided into unrestricted, temporarily restricted, and permanently restricted. And unrestricted is what it sounds like. You can spend money for anything you want to as a vestry. Temporarily restricted is where we put donor designated money that have paid money for Easter flowers or paid money for the youth mission trip or given money for the discretionary account or all these things that people give money for. That's where it goes in a fund accounting system into temporarily restricted. Or the vestry could have set aside some money that says, we think we're going to have to replace the roof in 3 years. Let's set aside this money right now and put it in temporarily restricted. Permanently restricted means somebody gave you the money and you can't spend it. Usually it's through a bequest and a will where someone left money, like at my parish, $105,000 to go towards a scholarship fund with a stipulation. You can have the 105, but you can't spend it. So invest wisely and spend what you earn off of it for scholarships. Now, a year and a half ago or so, that all got thrown out the window now that we understand this, right? So when you begin to see financial statements in the near future, if you haven't already, they will say without donor restrictions or with donor restrictions. So 3 got moved into 2. So what's in without donor restrictions? Pretty obvious. Nobody's put any restrictions on the donation. That leaves all the rest of the restrictions to go into with donor restrictions, except those vestry set-asides. Those vestry set-asides, reserves, if you want to call them, are in the without donor restriction. And in your notes to the financial statements, you'll see a schedule of what those are. Without the proper technology, you don't stand a snowball's chance of doing this with a commercial package. We've got to have financial visibility. We've got to have the financial information available. So whether it's putting it on the website or putting it out in a mailer in these times that would go out through an email or something, somewhere that says, here's how we're doing. Whether it's in a weekly email bulletin on Sunday, exactly what, but people like to know, how are we doing? They don't want to know how we're doing poorly if they haven't heard how we're doing well. So let's don't train them to understand poor and not train them to understand what it looks like to be successful. So this is a conversation that has to go on continually, and it has to be put out there. We want to make sure the members of the vestry can read and understand the financial statements, and more importantly, discuss them with church members when the need arises. Whether you're out having lunch and a parishioner walks up and you're a member of the vestry and they go, hey, how's that fundraiser going? Or, hey, can you tell me how we're doing on just financially in general? You need to be able to have that conversation with them if you're a vestry member.
There are 4 parts of the church that must be in balance for there to be transparency regarding financial matters. They are people, process, technology, and organization. We will now examine the 4th, organization. The organizational structure is the framework for people to execute the processes using the technology. A well-designed organization clearly defines roles and their relationships with one another. The organizational structure defines areas of responsibility and accountability. It defines the reporting structure for communications and approvals. This leads to the ability to provide oversight of the church through clearly defined spheres of influence and authority. By nature of an organization's structure, it defines the leadership and those with legitimate authority to make decisions. It supports the vision, mission, and goals of the church by having identifiable roles to which to attach quantifiable objectives. The organizational structure identifies those who are to be held accountable for accomplishing the goals. It also identifies who and at what level provide oversight of the church's operations. Oversight of the organization is the responsibility of both the CEO pastor and the governing body. It is they who inspect the process for compliance with the designed checks and balances. As the governing body is fiduciarily liable, it is they who are responsible for ensuring the proper execution of the processes that they designed. It is the CEO pastor who leads the staff and volunteers in their execution of the processes that were defined by the governing body. As one may see, the organizational structure is more than merely a chart with boxes and names. It should be closely integrated with people and processes and enabled by technology. It takes all four to create a transparent church.
So we're going to talk about the last part, organization. The roles are not job descriptions. Roles mean, what is it that you're going to do? What is it that we're going to hold you accountable as your results? And there are clearly defined roles for rectors, vestries, staff, and other volunteers. Title IV, Canon 4E says that is the obligation and responsibility and mere survival of clergy to safeguard the property and funds of the church and community. That Title IV is the title that is used to basically hold people accountable in the church, particularly clergy, for a number of different things. But it's very clear. Safeguard the property and funds of the church and community. Title III, Canon 9. Likewise, for the vestry. The alms and contributions and other offerings for the poor shall be deposited with the rector or priest, etc., for such pious and charitable uses as the rector or priest in charge shall determine. The discretionary fund is for pious and charitable uses, period. I had a parish that I audited for the very first time. And in looking through the rector's discretionary account, yes, I'll do that. I discovered that there was a check written in November for church music. And I said, well, what is this all about? Well, the organist didn't have enough money in his budget for church music. Okay. And I've written that now probably the last 10 or 11 years. Let me see if I understand this. For the last 10 or 11 years, you've gotten to November and not had this $600 in your budget for church music. So you write it out of your pious and charitable purposes fund. Yep. It's my discretionary fund. I can do that. Well, according to Canon, no, you can't. But that's neither here nor there. What it did was those things never hit the books of the church. Nobody in the 11 years of vestry or possibly going forward had any clue that it cost $600 more a year for church music than what was being budgeted. So if operating expenses get spent out of pious and charitable funds, often it goes through a discretionary account where you don't see what's actually being spent. This was where this money can't be secret, going back to some of our inhibitors to transparency. There was an audit that was done in the diocese here in Atlanta. Very large parish, very well respected and appreciated both by the parishioners as well as the church rector. And for 3 years running would not let anybody look at his discretionary account during the audit. When the chancellor finally got involved and made him, it was discovered that the condo in Florida had been being paid for out of the pious and charitable funds for $1,734 a month for the last 3 years. There are no secrets in the church. There's confidentiality, but there are no secrets. So let's look at the rector. They set the tone. We've been through that. But they manage the paid and voluntary operational staff. They're the day-to-day manager and director of the organization. They implement internal control. They don't design it. Title I, Canon 14, Section 2, except as provided by the law or state of the diocese, the vestry shall be agents and legal representatives of the parish in all matters concerning its corporate property and the relations of the parish to its clergy. This is what John Thompson Quarterly referred to earlier in our earlier session this morning, that you are agents, you are fiduciarily liable for the financial matters of the church. If money goes missing, it is the ultimate responsibility of the vestry to replace it. I'm waiting for this pause, because usually when I say something like that, I get these kinds of reactions. I didn't know that. Me neither. I'm out of here. No one ever told me. Huh? Sue me? I didn't even want to run for vestry. Is it too late to submit a resignation? Yikes. And about a third of the time, well, I knew that. I serve on other not-for-profit boards. I knew that. The vestry should have hands on the money. We talk about that first leg of the stool. Who's going to handle the money? If I'm on the vestry, I'm not going to turn that over to the ushers to collect, count, and deposit the money, because none of them are on the vestry, but I'm still liable for it. So I'm going to be involved somehow on a rotating basis or something, counting and depositing the donations. Authorizing expenditures. We've talked about income. Let's talk about outgo. The vestry is responsible for the outgo from the church as well, and that includes approving expenditures. Give you the perfect example. And my parish knows that I tell these stories all around the country, and they're fine with that. So this is my parish story. We had a columbarium put up, and we had a memorial garden and that sort of thing. And then they decided that they wanted to have a place to bury the pets. So we had a pet memorial garden. So the junior warden came to the vestry meeting and said, you know, we're going to do this pet memorial over here, and we're going to put in the grass, but we're going to have to put in some more sprinkler systems. So I'm going to have to spend some money. Well, who's going to do the sprinkler system? Well, I'm going to get the same people that did it always at the last time, and we've talked about it and so forth. Well, I moved. We put in the sprinkler system. Yeah, me too. That was it. Day comes, junior warden comes into the parish administrator. Come look, come look, come look. We've got it all done. Look at the grass, look at the sprinkler. Isn't it pretty? 2 weeks later, the invoice comes in. Well, the parish administrator knew that the vestry approved putting in the sprinkler system, and the parish administrator saw the sprinkler system. Well, here's the invoice. I guess we need to pay it. Gave it to the bookkeeper and said, pay it. Vestry meeting comes, the junior warden sits down and look at the financial statements and says, what happened to my money? What happened to my budget? Well, parish administrator was at the vestry meeting and said, well, the bill came in and I put it in to pay. Well, how much did you pay? Well, it was $1,800. I negotiated for $1,080, not $1,800. Well, we didn't get our $720 back, I can tell you that. But there's some problems with this. Who should have approved that invoice to be paid? The junior warden. Nobody else. And by the way, at the vestry meeting, there was no contract. There was no even mention of how much. There was no record. The vestry minutes just said, approved to put in sprinkler system for pets. That's all the minutes said. A proper set of vestry minutes would have had a contract, and the contract would have been attached. If you do not take ownership of your responsibility, it is still your liability. You cannot abdicate that at all. At the end of the day, you're liable. Other people might be responsible, but you can't make them pay for it out of their pocket. I was doing a presentation one time for a diocese, kind of a diocesan convention sort of thing. And I said, by the way, has anybody in here had a situation where they had to pull out their checkbook and write money back to the church because it disappeared inappropriately? And this little man in the back, about 80 years old, raised his hand and said, I did. I said, well, never seen him before, but okay. What happened? Well, we had somebody that was doing the books and they stole $60,000. And I walked into the vestry meeting and said, I'm 80 years old. I'm on Social Security. Here's a check for $1,000. Y'all figure it out. And I turned around and walked out. Well, what happened? Well, the other 11 people came up with the $59,000 and put it back in the church's bank. We can spend all afternoon with examples like that. But here's the thing. Do not be like the folks on this ship. But we've never done it that way. God loves St. Swithin. The vestry has fiduciary liabilities for the church's money. You're responsible for its accountability. You set the tone for the openness and the fair treatment of accounting transactions. And by that, I mean, it's not okay to say, well, we don't have any money in that budget for that. Let's take it from this budget over here. No. A budget is a good guess at the beginning of the year of what you think you're going to spend. It is not a set of lanes to stay in. It is okay to overrun a budget as long as you're doing it deliberately, consciously, or some disaster happens and the repair budget goes out the window. It's okay to underspend a budget. Because what does the budget ultimately end up being by the end of the year? It's not a measurement stick of whether you were able to stay within the budget, not at all. It's a track record of what it took to run the church. And it's input for the next vestry, for the next budget, to understand that we need $600 more to pay for music at Christmas. Or that we now have an activity that's really generating some buzz about it, and we overran the budget. So what? Let's budget for it this time. But if you bury it somewhere, you'll never get there. Your tone and how you hold people accountable. If you say that part of our way of doing things is receipts must be turned in before payment is made, no exception, then it must mean what it means. It can't mean the staff can get away without turning in their receipts for the credit card. And yet everybody else has to. It has to be followed completely. I had a situation where there was a petty cash account for $150 at a medium to large size parish. And the next year in the audit, it was suddenly a $1,500 petty cash account. And I said, why? Oh, well, Betty Lou has a Sam's card, and she said she'd go buy all the paper goods and supplies and all that for the church for the Wednesday night suppers and yada, yada, yada. And so we raised it from 150 to 1,500 to allow her to do that. Well, in January, the amount for Wednesday night suppers at Sam's Club for the supplies, etc., was $250. And she brought in that Sam's Club receipt and all the other receipts that went along with reimbursing this petty cash fund. But for the next 11 months, she could remember every single receipt except the Sam's Club receipt. Now, what does Sam's Club say to you? Any of you that might be using Sam's Club or have in the past, what do they say to you at checkout? Would you like cash back with this? It's amazing to me that Wednesday night supper expense in January at $250 went to $450 in July. Probably not. But she didn't turn in the receipt, and yet they still paid for it. The vestry is responsible for examination and oversight. You've got to review the budget versus actual. You've got to look at the financial statements monthly. You've got to know what you're reading. But most importantly, while the clergy execute the internal control, you are responsible for designing it and overseeing it. The things that we talked about up above, those are policies and procedures set in place by the vestry. And then they're inspected by the vestry to make sure that they actually occur. You have a liability for the church's money. You should be doing the approvals. If you say, okay, well, we're not going to sign every electricity bill, a water bill, and okay, make a vestry resolution that says the following invoices are to automatically be paid without requiring a signature, but make it and put it in the notes to the vestry meeting. Don't just ask the parish administrator whenever it comes in to pay it. You've got to maintain diligence. And no church is too small to implement internal controls. It only takes 3 legs of a stool. Let's look at the treasurer. I contend that the treasurer should not be a member of the vestry. If you get a good treasurer, you don't want them to roll off after 3 years. And they kind of become your internal auditor, if you will, or in other words, they report directly to the senior warden and the vestry, but they also report to the rector. They may attend the vestry meetings, but they should open and reconcile all financial related statements and communications. And that means letters from the government, etc. I had one parish where the treasurer opened the letter from the IRS that said, thank you for filing your 941 quarterly payroll taxes, but would you mind also sending us the check? Well, that person said, uh-oh, I decided not to pay those taxes because I wanted to make sure the rector got paid and we didn't have enough money. So let me change the address of the church with the IRS in case I have to do that again. Well, for the next 3.5 years, this person filed the 941s, but never wrote the IRS the check for the withholding and the Social Security, et cetera. The penalty alone was $39,000. 50% of the congregation left and have never come back, and it's been almost 15 years, and the church is still month to month. Your treasurer needs to examine the general ledger transactions. They just need to peruse the income and the outgo for the month, see if it makes sense. They might propose journal entries to the vestry for approval, and they become this third leg of the stool as they reconcile. The bookkeeper should never handle the money, including any signed checks. Come in on Sunday, sign the checks, leave them for the bookkeeper to mail on Monday. No, that's how the 11,900 got stolen. They need to write the checks, they need to post the books, and they run most of the financial computer applications, and they are a part of this three-legged stool where they are posting the books. What about church staff? It's okay to have the church staff record the pledges, just not handle the money. They become part of this second leg here. They can post the contributions. They become part of the stool. Volunteers. Now, volunteers might be used to count the money, or they might be committee chairs that report to vestry members and handle other monies like Sunday breakfast or Wednesday night supper or fundraising events, etc. So clergy execute the internal control, the processes, the policies that are set and designed deliberately by the vestry. In absence of that, you have people who are asked to do a job with no direction and no accountability and no way of knowing other than making it up. So what happens when we have transparency? Let's go back over our definition. Free from pretense or deceit. We have a frank, open, honest communication. Easily detected, obvious. One last story, one last example. I was at Wednesday night supper at my parish, and we always have somebody checking people in, another person taking the money. The two don't switch. At the end of the night, the person with the money sat down next to me and said, would you watch this while I count it and count behind me? Sure. And she gets up and takes the money box and starts across the parish hall, and the rector goes, hey, Betty Lou, make sure you get somebody to go downstairs with you to take the money to the safe. What did that just say to everybody in the room? Oh my, they're paying attention to the money that I give. They're even paying attention to the money for the pancakes. It sets a tone. Readily understood and characterized by visibility or accessibility of information, especially concerning business practices. We get giving that is not reluctantly or under compulsion, but a cheerful giver. If we have transparency, donor confidence will go up. They will be more certain that what they're giving is in fact being used for the purpose. I don't have any empirical data, although I'm now joining the faculty at Bexley after this conference, and we're going to do a study across the church. But my observation in my hundreds of churches I've dealt with, where a transition to transparency occurs or where there is this transparency, people participate more readily. They feel more closely that it's a part of their home and not a part of their events and their week. They come to the Wednesday night suppers. Their children participate in the youth groups. They feel more comfortable being a part of it rather than the entertainment value or whatever other reason they come to sit buns and seats only. My observation is that transparency actually raises giving levels. And in my own parish, it did it immensely. Your participation rate will go up. You'll typically end up with higher transaction amounts, and you'll get a broader participation in other giving opportunities. And it then leads you in a couple of years to have that conversation about long-term giving. And I'm sure Luke's going to have something to say about those things in a minute. But I did this presentation for the Episcopal Church Foundation. I got this email. And it says, thanks for your presentation. I found it online this morning. And since May of this year, transparency has been our ongoing approach. And lo and behold, our Pledge Sunday brought in 55 of 79 pledges. We figured if everyone increased their pledge by 5%, we'd make our financial goal. But they're up 12%. So, in summary, transparency is something that goes on daily. The vestry is completely involved in setting up that transparent environment with its policies, its processes, its procedures, and its expectations and its roles that it defines. The clergy clearly responsible for executing that while the vestry provides oversight. If you come by our booth, you'll probably meet Paul Hoagland, who is my consulting practice principal out of New York. This happens to be my cell phone number and Paul's cell phone number, because if you have a question or want to reach us, I want you to be able to. And then here are our email addresses. I am the author of this book. I will tell, in full disclosure, I make $2 off of every book out of that gets printed. So I usually get at least a good lunch or a good dinner every year out of CPG. But what we talked about today in a lot more detail is in the book. Look for the online classes that will come out of CDSP or out of Bexley Seabury or out of GTS or out of Emory, and bring the entire vestry. I will also do vestry 101s if you would like. And let me turn this now over. Come on, stop share. There we go. Let me turn this over to Luke that's going to talk with us about stewardship.
James, there was a question in the chat there that was about, someone asked a question, what's the difference between a diocesan audit and an audit by an outside CPA firm?
Good question. Let me answer by quickly saying, what is the definition of an audit? An audit is not a vernacular term. An audit is defined by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and it is provided by an independent CPA. Anything else is a look-through. I know that the canons, and I'm working with Kurt Barnes, who's the CFO of the church, to rewrite Canon 7 a little bit more clearly, and there will not be a reference to a licensed practicing accountant, because those haven't been around since the 1950s, and there will be a much clearer definition of what an audit is. But anything short of an independent audit, which verifies bank balances, examines transactions and things like that at a much different level than a review doesn't even do it. But my opinion, there's no such thing as an audit that's not an independent CPA audit. Thank you, Luke.
Great. And then I'm sure if folks have other questions, certainly pop them in the chat. Just doing a little time check. We're about 2:46. I have East Coast time here. So why don't we spend, maybe I'll do something reasonably lightning fast, and we'll talk a little bit about fundraising stewardship, and I'm going to share my screen here in a second. We'll get to a full screen. That would be helpful. Talk a little bit about, and hopefully everybody can see that now. So, and just a little background on me. I'll do a little quick hit on sort of the current philanthropic landscape, and just touch a little bit about sort of campaigns. Obviously, there's different types of stewardship. We have our annual giving, programs, and then also you have campaigns, which are a slightly different animal. I work at CCS. I'm one of the partners. CCS Fundraising is the largest of all the fundraising firms. We work in a variety of different sectors. So we work really all throughout the nonprofit landscape, but really how we started back in the late 40s was doing campaigns for churches. So most of my career, I've spent doing work with churches, Catholic, Episcopalian, other faiths as well as dioceses. So have a fairly good understanding of sort of the dynamics, and certainly all the things that James talked about. I've seen in terms of unfortunate stories, or as well as certainly processes that would make CPAs cringe a little bit. So I think we all have. So I think the content he was talking about is important, and so we've all seen it, and I think it's never too early to sort of fix it. We're coming out of certainly a more than challenging year. We did a philanthropic climate survey at CCS where we asked 1,000 different folks from nonprofits, organizations, all different types, from to kind of share sort of what they're seeing, how are they feeling. And we started the first one last May, and then we did it again in June, September, and then we just did it again in January. So sort of tracking what we're hearing in terms of trends and how people are feeling. The results on the next couple slides are really based on the approximately 70 or so that we got from religious institutions. So when we looked at some things and we asked people, what do they see as sort of the current landscape? So a number of things. Clearly a higher restricted on unrestricted funding, so that funds can be used for the area of greatest need. There's been an increase in sort of the work on annual appeals and major gift work. Obviously, when you can't, either you have limitations on bringing people together, or you simply can't, like for example, when there was a number of places were just locked down, a lot of folks didn't have a plan B on how to engage people to make gifts, follow up with folks. But since then, we've had a lot of successful virtual events. Folks have learned how to do things online. There's a lot of people who've gotten used to doing Facebook Live and those types of things. So hopefully coming out of all this, we'll have a deepened sense of community, and probably for some churches, you'll now have two communities. You'll have your normal kind of church-going community, and you'll probably also have an online community. Now, I think the benefit to that is it does certainly allow you to have people who can experience coming to services no matter where they are. So even if folks are traveling in the summer and things of that nature, or for those of us who are in a kind of a nasty weather part of the country in the winter, nobody's missing that because you still can sort of visit online. We asked some questions for folks about if they were looking at doing kind of a capital campaign or some type of campaign. We asked them, were they kicking off a campaign? Were they going to restart a campaign? You can kind of see the chart here that of folks that, were looking at that, they were in a campaign in 2020. Almost 40% had plans to continue their ongoing campaign to finish it. There's about 10% who said that things are under consideration. Another 10% you see on the left-hand chart there that are restarting a campaign, maybe that was paused last year, and 13% that are looking to kick off a new campaign. So good news is there's a sense of optimism out there. There's some light at the end of the tunnel. In terms of optimism, this is sort of looking at sort of this chart. What are we seeing? So the red bar, you kind of see trending down. This is from that group of 70 or so folks that sort of were surveyed. What were they seeing any decline? So in the beginning, back in May, a number of folks saw a decline. The good news is that's been receding. So we're trending in the right direction. That kind of light blue line in the center is where it's sort of been neutral or sort of kind of trended equally. And then the bottom, has increased. And so I would sort of venture to guess, just anecdotally talking to different churches, the folks that were proactive, similar to James had talked about, the folks that are proactive and told people what the needs were. They told people if there was a shortage of giving or they needed help. Those places certainly saw that there was an increase and a chance that more folks were giving. Just kind of quickly talking about some campaigns and sort of the difference of why a campaign. There's a number of reasons why you have to look at it. You have to have a rationale for support. Why are we doing this? We want to demonstrate the need, as James talked about, being transparent. Here's the challenge that we have. The campaign is a way to fix it. And so one of the reasons why you do that is it allows you to have either significant growth or change. It sort of finances the strategic plan or vision. Again, transparency, communication. Here's what we're doing. The vestry is sort of charting that, and then we're inviting the congregation to support it. So that's an important reason. If you don't have those things, if it's murky at all, you're probably not going to be successful in doing a campaign. So it's important that when you think about doing something that's over and above kind of your annual giving program, all these different things kind of need to be in place for it really to be as effective as possible. In terms of campaign types, and we'll wrap up in a minute here, and we'll have some time for discussion. Sometimes you have a single project, might be a smaller, campaign where maybe, we're fixing the organ, and that's not a huge campaign, but it's not insignificant beyond maybe what's in the budget. Some folks might be looking to build their endowment out. That's another thing. We talked about endowments earlier. You could have a capital campaign to sort of build something new or renovate or expand something. And sometimes you're sort of doing a comprehensive campaign that involves all those different things. On the right, you can see when we look at sort of recent campaigns that we've seen in terms of what people have used, good news, wide variety. So there's no, real any one particular area, that kind of blue pie to the top right, renovations, and also new construction on the bottom right, that kind of orangey red. Those, as you would expect, are the more common reasons why folks are doing campaigns. So sort of enhancements or improvements or new construction. So about 44% of all campaigns tend to fall in that category. Just a couple tips for success when you look at sort of doing this from a stewardship point of view. You want to set an ambitious or aspirational but achievable goals. Sometimes in your campaigns, you won't be able to raise all the funds for whatever you're looking to do. And that's where, again, as a vestry, you have to be very thoughtful about planning out, how are we going to do this? Are we only going to tackle something we can afford? Are we going to finance some portion of that? So all those discussions, again, need to happen sort of before you get out there and start asking people. Other important things is really providing regular orientation to everybody on the vestry and volunteers about what best practices are, about what everyone's role it is. In a campaign, there's a number of other things here that we're making sure that you're looking at, who the prospects, who are the potential donors. You're sort of making sure that you're putting strategy together to pull that together. Clear, easy. We talked about sort of being concise and easily understood, clear talking points about the project. All these things are very important to having a successful effort. And these also would apply as well in just annual stewardship efforts, sort of making sure it's a clear plan, et cetera. And sort of last thing I'd cover before we kind of open to questions is the things you'd want to avoid in terms of your stewardship efforts, whether it's annual fundraising or in a campaign. You don't want to have a weak or a sort of a muddy case. People don't understand what we're giving towards. We don't want to have a lack of planning. We don't want to also have an end date to when we think this. Sometimes we've all been involved in things that seem to last forever. And then the last thing is a sort of a lack of direction or management. So all these things are important to do. What I'll do is I'll kind of exit out of this and stop sharing. And we also can make sure that we're looking at the chat and answering any questions folks might have. But I think the main thing, and we'll share this with everybody, the important thing I usually find working with vestries with both annual fundraising and campaigns is having a clear plan. As James talked about, being clear and transparent, making sure that we're sharing that with the congregation, answering people's questions. None of these things are hard things to do, but are important. And things where I think where we sort of stumble are some of the things that James highlighted in his point, maybe not always veering to the fraud point of view, but just either a lack of understanding about things or a lack of a plan. And then, obviously all things that if folks have a lack in trust in the process, then that sort of usually will have issues with folks being concerned about making gifts and how the gifts would be used. So the more you can be clear and easily understood, and the more that you can communicate, the better. So with that, I'll just pause and see if Jim or James wanted to add anything, and just want to be conscious of everybody's time. We got about 3 or 4 minutes to go.
Look, the only thing I would jump in and add is that, and I think we could probably take another hour and a half talking about this, but there are generational differences in what transparency means. I think James has correctly walked through a very compliance and technically correct oriented discussion of that. I don't quibble with any of what he said, but folks from younger generations than mine anyway define transparency differently, and they also have a different view on what role transparency plays and how they want to engage in philanthropy. And I know your firm knows a lot about that, but I was just wondering if you had any comments about that, or whether you would alter any of your slides if you were talking to a group of millennials versus a group of boomers.
No, I prefer to keep the same story consistent. So, I think there's transparency, and I think in terms of levels of it, like anything else, there's a difference between sort of sharing something that is for general consumption, and you can sort of have a sort of a review of books and other things in a more meaningful way. But it's also that kind of thing where you need to be able to share the information in a way that's digestible for your audience. So nothing's hidden, but it needs to be clear, easily understood. And we also sort of, anybody who wants to dive deeper in that, we don't want to sort of be in a town hall meeting where somebody's got a million questions. We say, hey, Joe, this is great. Anybody who'd like to have a deeper dive, why don't we spend some time in educating everybody on that? But you're not sort of not addressing the question, but you're also not sort of asking somebody who wants to take Jim's class while we all watch.
Right.
We have about 21 questions. Can you guys sift through those quickly and see which ones you can answer without taking too much time?
Yes.
Thank you. So there they are.
I think there was one question about earlier, I remember us seeing it, but somebody has an endowment that's under the supervision of a separate board of trustees. And somebody said, if I'm the senior warden, what should I expect from that separate board of trustees? So maybe Jim and James, you guys could tackle that.
I have several clients that have that situation. And the thing that I would say is, and it depends on how long this has been around. I have one that was started in 1949, and it was hard to break it. But the money, if it was given to the church, it belongs to the church, period. You might have a set of board of trustees that you want to have manage that. But there are things called MIFA laws and so forth that are in each state that you need to get into. But at the end of the day, the vestry is fiduciarily liable for all of those funds, period. They might be in a separate corporation, but not in the eyes of the church. If they were given to the church, they belong to the church. You can organize it however you want to in a separate corporation, but that board needs to report to the vestry. I can't see questions, so I'm not sure where.
I think y'all actually, James, you answered some of the questions in the chat that were specifically addressed for your presentation.
Okay.
And I think with that response for Paul's question, I think those are actually all the questions that were asked, but I would just ask if anybody else has a last burning question to pop that in there for us. And for your future reference, later this spring, I was told by our executive director that Jim and Luke have both already agreed to offer some digital workshops in a couple of months. Hopefully they did, and this is not a surprise announcement to them. But you'll have another opportunity to hear from some of our speakers today. But we're just so grateful for all of you for the time and the wisdom and the energy that you've shared with us. And you can connect with all of them on the app. There is also a community discussion board function where you could, if you want to, create a topic around follow-up questions from the Smart Start, or sorry, pre-conference as we're calling them now. And that app will be live for 6 months after the conference. And so materials from today will be shared both via the app, and also we can email presentations and things to you. So definitely keep making use of the app for the resources and the connections. And
I see one other
yeah, go for it.
resources to help Vestry members to become more comfortable. I'm not trying to make my $2 on the book, but that is in the book. If you'll go to Amazon and read the reviews that Vestry members have given it, I think you'll find that useful. Also, I do webinars or whatever if you want me to, mostly at no charge unless I'm actually teaching a class. So reach out to me and let me provide you whatever I can in the form of lectures or videos or other references to help address anything. Like I said, my cell phone's in the presentation and in the app.
Great. And you can also stop by his virtual exhibit space if you want to do that and chat with him there. And again, one of the great things about the app this year is it will stay active for 6 months. And so you can also connect with each other that way as well. And I will refer back to our fearless moderator to just close us out today.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank our panelists. You guys, it was an excellent presentation. So I'm hoping that we will take this information back and actually use it, because I can't imagine any vestry without this information. So thank you again, and thank you everyone for coming, and have a great rest of the time with us this week.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.